Hello, this is me. Hi, I'm a person. I'm a human being on planet Earth. I'm starting to really sort of get irritated by just the general malaise. Um, the average person and people who I've known since like middle school, honestly, they don't want to have to think, and it's very frustrating. Um, They don't want to have to think about hard stuff, difficult things. This is the human condition. I understand that. It's part of the reason why I'm unrelatable to a lot of people, I guess, because, um, and I don't know if that's a problem or not. I mean, is it a problem? I don't know. Is I'm not the kind of person that's gonna shoot up a supermarket, so I'm not gonna hurt anybody. I'm not gonna do any stupid shit. I'm just unrelatable in the sense that I want to think about hard problems. I want to think about solutions to hard problems. I want to understand and through that understanding create for the betterment of society and the future of humanity. Now I made my previous video about, little smaller acts of kindness being the more important thing these days, but I'm still going to be possessed by this uh, journey of big solutions to big problems. And I watched a video just a moment ago, basically about a prominent Indian activist. I can't remember her name. She has a very, unfamiliar type name. I think it's Arya Vedanta or something to that effect. But basically, what she's talking about is Bill Gates. Billy. Oh, goddamn Billy. Why do you have to try to take over the world, Billy? And his plot basically to the good old colonial plot to take over by divide and conquer, and his idea of big data and just like this whole thing of the maniacal urge of the elite class to try and enslave the masses one way or another through information or through restriction of access to resources, yada, yada, yada. It's getting harder and harder to deal with people who don't want to have to think. It's as though this regression. Now, I was also watching a video with Edward Snowden and him talking basically about this regression that we've seen in the past decades, past couple decades or a decade or so, with the draconian measures that are being set into place to limit our freedoms. And you have to think, Edward Snowden isn't exactly the fringe radical type. You know what I mean? He's an intellectual, or even more so, just a mathematical type of nerd. He's a nerd, for Christ's sake. You have one of the most typical types of highly intelligent and logical people telling you that the systems that he's aware of history, as anybody who's intelligent would have some kind of repertoire of history, and he's essentially saying the same kind of things that I've been saying, or that a lot of other people have been saying. People like Alex Jones have been saying, basically, that the control grid is being set in place, and we have to be aware of it. Why is that so hard for people to understand, or so difficult for people to get behind? That the systems that are being set into place with the Great Reset, the World Economic Forum's Great Reset, and so on and so forth, that this is all happening that it's all happening. You can't argue this. This is what's happening. This is what's historically been the case, and that this is what is coming to pass. And that if we don't stand up and say no to it, it is what is going to happen to us. And it's just getting harder and harder to uh, have any relationship with people who don't get this. The see this, and this is the problem, is that even this is further dividing people. The idea that we should be free individual human beings with bodily autonomy as a basic human right, inalienable basic human right, derived from God and not from, and this is why the God thing was so important, and why throwing that out was throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because as soon as you take God out of the equation, you take out basically the entire premise of why we have freedom in the first place. Because the premise of an inalienable right derived from your creator is unarguable. You can't argue with God. You can't argue with the premise that God gave you the gift of free thinking and of bodily autonomy and the fruits of your own labor and all of these things. The second that we took God out of the equation and created a sort of technocratic sort of filament for the entire basis of our society, we destroyed the basis for our freedoms in the Bill of Rights, which is why there's such a strong push to take away or to destroy the Second Amendment. Because when you destroy the Second Amendment, you can then revert back and destroy the First Amendment. And what the works of H.G. Wells essentially tells us is that there is a communist utopia being developed by the intellectual elite of the world. This was essentially the reason or the impetus behind A Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, I believe. That all of the concerted effort of the elite, and though it's taken 100 years or so, it's happening now. And I believe that, yeah, 98 or 100 years is long enough for these people. They kind of are fed up. It's been a generation now. They want to see by the end of their lives the fulfillment of this prophecy. And the reality is not going to be a utopia, for Christ's sake. It's going to basically be the world, the global, and the enslavement of the world at the by elevating these people to essentially godhood. We will be reduced to robots, slaves, essentially. And I think that that's it falls in alignment with Aristotle's economics, which is basically that you need slaves in order to have a good household. Slaves are necessary, and that's what they've made sure happens, is that they have a stable, consistent source of human slavery in order to fulfill their goals, whatever they may be. And I think it's a big picture issue, not so much an issue where you focus on just the basic aspects of it, like basic production. I mean, you want there to be slaves, a source of slaves for making the very least attractive products, things like whatchamacallit, license plates and such. And it's like, it's unnecessary, but it's unnecessary to have a wellspring or a source of slaves in an age of technology, but it's still there because it's ethically it's a responsible thing ethically from the point of view of these people, that you can't just let people who are impoverished just exist out in the world. You can't let people who are radical and act in such a way that they defy the systems that are in place. You can't let Bonnie and Clyde exist, for God's sakes, even though essentially what they were doing was akin to Robin Hood. You can't let Robin Hood exist. You can prop him up as a story to tell to children, but you can't let him actually exist in the modern world. You can't have a Robin Hood type running around spreading actual wealth to the people who are poor. I mean, for heaven's sakes, that's the government's job. Don't you see? It's the government's job to take away the wealth of the poor and redistribute it back to the poor. Doesn't make any sense. But nonetheless, that's the world we live in. And like the solutions, this could be sort of the second part of this talk that I'm giving right now. So the problem, people don't think. Solution, education. The economic insecurity of people is rooted in the fact that we have single motherhood as the predominant household scenario. That's not economical at all. That's not ethical at all. Under any premise of human society, that is not an ethical situation, but it's being propagandized and positioned in such a way that the media will tell you that it is the ethical way and that it's just as valid and just as good as if you have a family, the conventional family household with mom and dad in the house. Don't be so insensitive to other people that you would suggest that what they're doing is wrong, because there is no right or wrong, because everything is relative, and that you can't. So okay, the reality is it's harmful. It's harmful to society. It's harmful to the political situation in the world to have children being raised by single mothers. Period. End of story. And the reality behind all of this is that people are not practicing any form of discipline on themselves whatsoever. We got rid of religion, and we got rid of the cultural stigmas rooted from that religion regarding single motherhood and the destruction of society because of that, because of single motherhood. So the solution to that, in my point of view, having thought about this a great deal, is a practical system of discipline, of self-discipline, which results in a person's freedom and or greater responsibility for themselves and for the world around them. And I call it the Pentivium. I mentioned it in other videos. That, to me, is the solution for the individual problem. The societal problem has to be solved by a great number of people who are practicing this process of purifying yourself from the ills of society and from your own bad habits and so on and so forth, rooted in the overall cultural problems that basically are influencing your life, the addictions, the bad habits, the array of sitting in front of the television for hours, or your phone, or whatever it is, to disconnect essentially from the technology. Second thing would be then to accumulate knowledge primarily regarding yourself, regarding the nature of self and the nature of the world in which you live, the metaphysics, basically. And once accumulated, the acting out of that knowledge. For instance, I can tell you that meditation will heal your mind, but until you practice meditation, you can learn about meditation, and until you practice it, it's only potential knowledge. It's not actual knowledge. And so the actualization of the accumulation of knowledge, the acting out of that knowledge, is integral to the whole process of enlightenment and of self-discovery. And then once you find a certain amount of balance in that process, you start being able to play life as a true avatar instead of as an NPC in the game of life, as it were, if I'm going to use the metaphor, which I tend to use. And so the whole point being basically, if we practice the something like the Pentavium, at least, I mean, freaking read a book, for God's sakes. Read a non-fiction book about read a philosophy book, basically. Read some Aristotle. And obviously don't read it and then just like, oh yes, we must have slaves. Yes, of course. Don't just take it's the sign of an educated mind to hear an idea without accepting it. You don't have to accept what he's saying and as like truth, and that goes with everything. You can read the Hermetic texts and say, okay, I like that idea, and okay, I don't like that idea. It's okay to filter out ideas. It's okay to process and use logic and not just accept everything that you hear. It's okay to do that, and in fact, I would encourage it. But the point is basically this process and the education of the individual is the starting point. And once we actually get to a point of individual sovereignty due to that process of education and becoming players of life instead of being played by others for their own reasons and their own sort of benefit, we can start to come together more and be less divided, because we'll actually be able to think independently, freely. And instead of using the media as a source of how to think and what, or not how to think, but what to think, then maybe there's a chance. Maybe we'll have a chance at survival, because that's what this is ultimately about, the survival of humanity. Because what they want, the Georgia Guidestones basically are the 10 Commandments of the New World Order kind of system that H.G. Wells wrote about 100 years ago, and that George Bush talked about in the 90s, and that a number of people, prominent figures throughout contemporary modern history, have also evoked and spoken of. A new world order. Okay? This is not anything new. It's not new, and it's not order. It's the same old shit repackaged. It's colonialism, it's tyranny repackaged. Okay? It's technocracy. It's them basically saying that you are not a incarnation of the divine. You are a robot, a slave, and for that reason, you are a product to be packaged and sold. You are a number to be regulated and controlled. Okay? That's the reality. If you want to argue with that, that's fine. I don't care. Because quite frankly, you're already, if you're arguing that and you don't see that that's what's happening, then you're already lost, and I don't have any respect for you. Now, if you have a sense that, I mean, I have respect for you as a human being, but I don't have respect for your ideas. I certainly don't have any respect for your ideas. If you honestly think that what the world is being turned into is a utopia, then you're a goddamn idiot. And if you don't see that there's a need to fight for the future generations of this world, and even just for people who are of the Z generation or whatever the fuck it is now, if you don't have an understanding about the nature of the world that we're being brought into, and don't see that it needs to be fought tooth and nail before it consumes all of us, then you're like the blind person. I mean, in the Bible, they talk about, like, the scales over their eyes and shit like that. You have scales over your eyes. You're delusional. Your head is in the sand. And I don't have time for you. The only thing I have time for at this point is just to tell people, look, we have the power to change all of this, and we are responsible for doing so. There's no Christ gonna come down from the heavens try to save us. It's not going to happen. We are the second coming of Christ if we have the wherewithal to recognize it and act upon it. That's the reality. We have to fight for our lives at this point. And I don't necessarily mean physical violence. I mean in the sense that we need to educate ourselves and lift ourselves out of this before it becomes a critical point where the B trap closes us in and we have no way of escaping. Um, I know plenty of people who are ultra liberal who want to mandate like sterilizing boys or basically cutting tying their tubes until they're verified as like worthy of being a parent. Um, the reality is if you were to do that, not very many men would even want to reverse the surgery. Or who wants to have kids these days, and with whom? I mean, it's only going to be Christians basically who are trying to reproduce, and then at that point what you're setting the stage for is basically like I respect the idea of the ethical basis for a God, but I don't like Christians. I'm not a Christian. I don't have Christian values in a lot of ways. Some of them I do because I don't throw the baby out with the bathwater because I'm an intelligent fucking person. But not very many people can say that. A lot of people just throw the baby out with the bathwater and say Christianity is bad because it advocates for yada, 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 and the restriction of female bodily autonomy and yada, yada, yada. The issue there is, you have people that are literally saying, well, I don't want any unnecessary death because of a virus, but when it comes to abortion, I'm totally pro-abortion. I'm not even pro-choice. I'm pro-abortion, which is absolutely lunatic insanity. We need to have a situation where we can all come together, but the problem is the media and all the rest of it are dividing us by saying that it's about race, that it's about sex, that it's about this, that it's about that. The reality is it's actually about economic equality, economic justice. That's the fundamental reality. It's economic justice. The absolute insanity of how much is extracted from the population because of the draconian economic laws that have been developed over the past 100 years have ensured that basically a preponderance, a incredibly high number of people are basically functionally illiterate and borderline mentally retarded. And so that population of people isn't going to be able to recognize when propaganda is being used against them. They simply won't be able to recognize it. No matter how much you tell them or educate them about what propaganda is and how it operates, they are not going to be able to recognize it when it's being employed against them. And this can be even the case with people who are relatively intelligent. Now, that being the case, the solution, again, I say, is education, but it has to start with the individuals, and then it has to be implemented on the coming generations. And it can't be a situation where the parent, like, look, it's not gonna be implemented with single mothers. Single mothers are not gonna be the practitioners of the Pentivium. I'm not gonna be like, there's no way for me to get people on board with that because single mothers are already strained and stressed as it is. They can't be expected to use what limited time they have to be practitioners of something that is so like in depth, or something that requires so much depth. They're not going to be able to do that. Period. It's just not real. It's not realistic, and I wouldn't expect that. But the reality is that there's an entire swathe of the population of people who are not married, who do not have children, who have the ability and the capacity to be practitioners of this, who can educate the children of the world. And what needs to happen is that the activism needs to switch from being about trampling around in the streets and being rah, to educating ourselves and actually just straight up being educators and strategizing ways to set up our own education system separate from the current one in such a way that we can actually create a totally different culture altogether, rooted in education. And that is really the basis of all of this, is that education needs to be the foundation for our economy, as well as for, and by that I mean regulation of the household specifically in the Aristotelian sort of philosophical sense, that we need to really be uh, thinking about how our households are being organized and how exactly that affects our society and the greater culture. Because if we don't, I fear that within a generation or so, we will witness the total collapse of our civilization into a technocratic dictatorship of the elite class over the 99%, 99.9%. It's going to be the 0.1% against the 99.9%. And how is that even feasible? Yet that's what's happening. That's what's happening because they're going to be using, they have all the money, so they have all the guns, the gun wielding borderline retarded individuals that are going to be exercising or implementing the laws that are created by these elite class. We can only hope and pray that those people will come to their senses and realize that what they're doing is actually anti-human, but I'm not counting on it. My trust in the police is very limited. So there you have it. I mean, what more do you need than the fact that this entire systemic problem of uh, chaos and disorder is being originated from the very powers that are claiming to try and resolve it? I mean, Christ, look at the UK. It's basically V for Vendetta right now in the UK. That's literally what it is. And the dystopia is already here. Like people want to argue this. This is why I'm fed up with this. You don't want to think? Well, too bad. You either start thinking and start acting, or you're going to be enslaved if you aren't already and don't realize it. More than likely, you already are. How in the fuck did we get here, and how do we get out of it? That should be the question. That's the question that I want to ask to the audience, and I hope that I get some comments or something like that in the bottom. If anybody has actually lasted this long, I doubt it. But those who did, hey man, I respect and love you for listening to me. Um, I don't deserve your views or whatever. Honestly, I'm just nobody and I don't know anything. So, uh, with that, I guess I'll sign off. Love and appreciation. Peace.